a Wikividi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. F. Lee Bailey. Francis Lee Bailey Jr. is an American former criminal defense attorney. For most of his career he was licensed in Massachusetts and Florida, where he was disbarred in 2001. Among other high-profile trials, he served as the lawyer in the retrial of osteopathic physician Sam Shepard, was the supervisory attorney over attorney Mark J. Kadish in the court-martial of Captain Ernest Medina for the My Lai massacre, and was one of the lawyers for the defense in the O.J. Simpson murder case. He has also had a number of visible defeats, legal controversies, and personal troubles with the law, and was disbarred in Massachusetts and Florida for misconduct while defending his client Claude Duboc. In 2014, he was denied a law license by the Maine State Bar Association and the Maine Supreme Judicial Court. Early life. Bailey was born in Waltham, Massachusetts. His mother was a teacher and nursery school director. Bailey attended Cardigan Mountain School and then Kimball Union Academy, where he graduated in 1950. He studied at Harvard College, but dropped out in 1952 to join the United States Marine Corps. Bailey was commissioned as an officer and, following flight training, received his Naval Aviator wings in 1954. He served as a jet fighter pilot and then began to serve as a squadron legal officer, the role he filled until he resigned his commission in 1956. He briefly returned to Harvard before being admitted to Boston University School of Law in 1957, which accepted his military experience in lieu of the requirement for students to have completed at least 3 years of undergraduate college courses. While attending Boston University, he achieved the highest grade point average in the school's history. He graduated with an LL.B. in 1960 and was ranked first in his class. Sam Shepard. In 1954, Sam Shepard was found guilty in the murder of his wife Marilyn. The case is regarded as one of the inspirations for the television series The Fugitive. In the 1960s, Bailey, at the time a resident of Rocky River, Ohio, was hired by Shepard's brother Stephen to help in Shepard's appeal. In 1966, Bailey successfully argued before the U.S. Supreme Court that Shepard had been denied due process, winning a retrial. A not guilty verdict followed. This case established Bailey's reputation as a skilled defense attorney, and was the first of many high-profile cases. Boston Strangler. While defendant Albert DeSalvo was in jail for a series of sexual assaults known as the Green Man incidents, he confessed his guilt in the Boston Strangler murders to Bailey. DeSalvo was found guilty of the assaults, but was never tried for the stranglings. Carlaco Polino. Dr. Carlaco Polino was accused of the July 30, 1963, murder of retired Army Colonel William Farber, his neighbor, and the husband of Marjorie Farber, with whom Copolino was having an affair. He was also accused of the August 28, 1965, murder of his wife, Carmela Copolino. The prosecution claimed that Copolino injected his victims with a paralyzing drug called succinylcholine chloride, which, at the time, was undetectable due to limited forensic technology. Bailey successfully defended Copolino in the New Jersey case over the death of Farber in December 1966. However, Copolino was convicted of murdering his wife in Florida. He was paroled after serving 12 years of his sentence. George Edgerly. Bailey attended Keeler Polygraph Institute in Chicago, where he became an expert in lie detector tests. It was in this capacity that he was enlisted by the defense in the case of George Edgerly, a mechanic charged with murdering his wife. When Edgerly's attorney was incapacitated by a heart attack, Bailey took over the defense. Edgerly, whose story was one of several that served as the basis for the television series and film The Fugitive, was acquitted. Ernest Medina. Bailey successfully defended U.S. Army Captain Ernest Medina in his 1971 court-martial for responsibility in the My Lai massacre during the Vietnam War. Medina was court-martialed for allegedly allowing the men in the company he commanded to murder My Lai non-combatants. Medina claimed that he never gave orders to kill non-combatants, and that his men killed non-combatants of their own volition. Medina also testified that he was unable to stop the massacre because he did not become aware of it until it was too late. Medina additionally denied personally killing any Vietnamese non-combatants at My Lai, with the exception of a young woman whom 2 soldiers testified that they had found hiding in a ditch. When she emerged with her hands held up, Medina shot her because, as he claimed at his court-martial, he thought she had a grenade. Medina was acquitted, and subsequently left the army. He later worked at an Enstrom Helicopter Corporation plant in which Bailey had an ownership stake. Patty Hearst. The prosecution of Patty Hearst, a newspaper heiress who had committed armed bank robberies after being kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army, was one of Bailey's defeats. In her autobiography, Hearst described his closing argument as disjointed, and said that she suspected he had been drinking. During his closing argument, Bailey spilled a glass of water on his pants. Hearst was convicted and sentenced to 7 years in prison. She served 22 months before her sentence was commuted by President Jimmy Carter in 1977. She was pardoned by President Bill Clinton in 2001. While Hearst was convicted at trial, Bailey did protect her from a further death penalty prosecution. On April 28, 1975, members of the SLA had robbed a Crocker Bank branch in Carmichael, California. Hearst drove one of the getaway cars. A customer was killed when one of the robbers gunned discharged. The Symbionese Liberation Army members participating in the robbery were therefore subject to the death penalty under the felony murder rule. Bailey negotiated with prosecutors for Hearst to receive immunity in exchange for her testimony about the Carmichael robbery, thus protecting her from a possible death sentence. Claude Duboc. In 1994, while the O.J. Simpson case was being tried, Bailey and Robert Shapiro represented Claude Duboc, an accused marijuana dealer. In a plea bargain agreement with the U.S. Attorney, Duboc agreed to turn over his assets to the U.S. government. These included a large block of stock in Biochem, worth approximately $6 million at the time of the plea deal. When the government sought to collect the stock, it had increased in value to $20 million. Bailey claimed he was entitled to the appreciation in payment of his legal fees, since he had used the stock as collateral for loans. He was unable to turn over the stock to the government. In 1996, Bailey was sent to prison for contempt. After 44 days at the Federal Correctional Institution, Tallahassee, Bailey's brother succeeded in raising the money to enable him to return the stock, and he was freed. O.J. Simpson. Bailey joined the O.J. Simpson defense team just before the preliminary hearing. Bailey held numerous press conferences to discuss the progress of the case. In a press conference prior to his cross-examination of Mark Fuhrman, Bailey said, "Any lawyer in his right mind who would not be looking forward to cross-examining Mark Fuhrman is an idiot." His famous cross-examination of Fuhrman is considered by many to be the key to Simpson's acquittal. In front of a jury composed predominantly of people of color, Bailey got the detective to claim, Marine to Marine, he never used the word nigger to describe blacks at any time during the previous 10 years, a claim the defense team easily found evidence to refute. Ultimately, the statement that Bailey drew from the detective forced Fuhrman to plead the fifth in his next courtroom appearance, thereby undermining his credibility with the jury and the otherwise devastating evidence he allegedly found. Bailey also attracted minor attention for keeping a silver flask on the defense table, which fellow defense attorney Robert Kardashian claimed contained only coffee. William and Chantel McCorkle. Chantel McCorkle, along with her American husband William, was tried and convicted in 1998 in Florida for her part in a financial fraud. The McCorkles sold kits, advertised in infomercials, purporting to show buyers how to get rich by buying property in foreclosures and government auctions. Among the grounds for their conviction was their representation in the infomercials that they owned luxury automobiles and airplanes, and their use of purported testimonials from satisfied customers, who were actually paid actors. Chantel, represented by Mark Horvitz, and her husband, represented by Bailey, were each originally sentenced to over 24 years in federal prison under mandatory sentencing laws. After 2 appeals, the McCorkles' sentences were reduced in 2006 to 18 years. Korean Airlines Flight 007. A strike to Bailey's credibility came when he took on the case of aggrieved families of passengers on Korean Airlines Flight 007, which was shot down over the Soviet Union in 1983. Though he made several public statements attesting to his commitment to the case, his law firm put in a much smaller number of hours on the case than did the two other law firms working on it. He aggravated other clients by traveling to Libya to discuss defending two men who were charged with blowing up Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. Even after undertaking the cause of the relatives of that bombing's victims. To the latter, the expedition to Tripoli was a clear conflict of interest. Bailey denied that he intended to defend the Libyans, though a letter he had written to the U.S. government suggested otherwise. Coscut Interplanetary. Coscut Interplanetary and Dare to Be Great were multi-level marketing companies owned by Glenn W. Turner. In 1973, Turner, Bailey, and 8 others were indicted by a federal grand jury on conspiracy and mail fraud charges. The indictment said that Bailey had appeared in a film made for Turner's organization and had appeared with Turner at several rallies. A 9-month trial ended in a hung jury. Charges were then dropped against Bailey. In 1975, Turner pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor charge of violating securities laws and was given probation. Paul is dead. Bailey was featured in an RKO television special in which he conducted a mock trial, examining various expert witnesses on the subject of the "Paul is dead" rumor, referring to Beatle Paul McCartney. One of the experts was Fred Larbaugh, whose article in the Michigan Daily had been instrumental in the spread of the urban legend. Larbaugh told Bailey, during a pre-show meeting, that he had made the whole thing up. Bailey responded, "Well, we have an hour of television to do. You're going to have to go along with this." The program aired locally in New York City on November 30, 1969, and was never re-aired. Brought to you by Wikividi Documentaries. Would you like